So this mechanism, like, I guess the biggest example of a mystery, like how did a creature do what it did, is us.
Mm-hmm.
We're the biggest weirdos in the entire planet.
Yep.
So what do you think led us to accelerate so far ahead of this process?
My advisor, I believe, nailed the answer to that question. My
Really?
advisor was a guy named Dick Alexander. He was a marvelous human being and a very insightful biologist. His argument was that human beings, or our ancestors, attained a kind of ecological superiority where the most important dictator of whether or not you evolutionarily succeeded or failed was your competition with other humans. And so his point, which I think is accurate, is that it is humans in an arms race with other humans that caused the radical elaboration of our capacity to puzzle solve, to think, to exchange abstractions. Now, I would add to that, and Heather and I have written on this, that the mechanism, we argue that there is a flip-flop that will happen in evolutionary modes for human beings. So as we talked about a few minutes ago, humans are special in the sense that the genome, which is still the thing that is trying to get into the future, has solved genome problems by offloading the adaptive capacity to our software layer, right? Once your software layer has the capacity to adapt and is not tethered to changes in your genome, well, now you can evolve very rapidly. But how do you do it? And what Heather and I argued in our book is that there is a flip-flop between two modes of cognitive functioning for humans. One of them is the mode that you employ when your relationship to your environment is very much like your ancestors' relationship to their environment. So in other words, if you are in a circumstance and your grandparents knew how to live in the place that you live, it does not make sense to be trying to figure out some new way to be. What makes sense is for you to do whatever they were doing and maybe improve it if you could figure out how. But in general, what you should do is you should accept the ancestral wisdom in a cultural form, and you should learn to do whatever it is your people do, and you should do it as well as you can and upgrade it if that's an opportunity. But there comes a place, either in space or in time, when whatever it is that your ancestors were doing is no longer productive, right? So if you imagine that your people are, I don't know, maybe you hunt elk. Well, if we move far enough across space, there'll be some place where there aren't elk, right? Where the habitat isn't hospitable to them. Maybe it's too dry. And so you could take the ancestral wisdom that talks about how to hunt elk, or you could recognize that that's not very productive here, and we need to do something else. So I don't know exactly what it is that you'll move to, but you'll have to innovate some new way of being, you know. Maybe you'll take up, hunting smaller game, right? Or maybe you'll take up gathering some material, or maybe you'll invent farming. But the point is, wherever you are in either space or time, that your ancestors' wisdom is no longer highly productive, you will be triggered into this second mode, which we would call consciousness. So the first mode is culture, second mode is consciousness. And the idea of consciousness is that human beings have the capability of doing something no other creature can do. We can exchange abstract ideas between individuals. And that means, and we use the metaphor of a campfire for this, that a human population will gather around the campfire at night, and they will talk about whatever they've observed in their habitat, and they will talk about what opportunities there are there and how those opportunities might be exploited. And they will parallel process the puzzle, right? Every member of the group has different skills and insights, And so in talking about how the new opportunities might be exploited, they will come up with some prototype for a new way of being. So the argument I've made is when during normal times, your ancestors knew pretty well how to exploit the habitat that you'll be born into. You should take their wisdom and deploy it. If you are at the edge of that habitat, or you are at the point where that habitat changes and it isn't any longer productive to try to do what your ancestors did, you will engage in this conscious exchange of insight, consciousness, that will allow you to innovate a new niche. And at the point you've got that new niche pretty well figured out, it will be turned into a culture that will be passed on to future generations until it's no longer useful. So that process accounts, we believe, for the radical variation in niches that human beings inhabit, right? Thousands of niches over the history of our species. That's unlike any other creature. For any other creature, once you've named the species, you've pretty much named a niche, right? Some way of being that species engages in. For human beings, this isn't true. Human beings are like thousands of different species. The differences between them, there are some physical differences, but most of those differences between the de facto species that exist within our overarching species, most of those differences are housed in the cultural layer, right? They're software, they're not hardware. That is an amazing capability for a creature to have, the ability to switch niches in this way and therefore adopt every continent, every habitat except the Arctic has been made productive by people.